This is Get Real with Deb Waterbury, a show where Dr. Deb gets real as she teaches through books and studies on topics relevant for today. And now, here is your host, Dr. Deb Waterbury.
Hi, welcome back to our next lesson in our study of James. We have just a couple of weeks left of this study. It's gone by so fast. And we're talking about James expositionally. You know, that word exposition just means you're taking something a verse at a time. So that's what we've been doing through the book of James. We've been talking about, last time we talked about wisdom and submission and how, you know, it takes great wisdom to be able to understand how to control one's tongue or how to be able to prove you are who you say you are, but you cannot have that wisdom. You might have that earthly wisdom, but you're not going to have worldly wisdom, which is fully dependent on God unless you've submitted to Him. So we talked about wisdom and submission. Again, we're kind of loosely going through James on the Mount, which is a book I wrote some years ago, available at Amazon or at debwaterbury.com if you would like to get this book. Otherwise, in this next two sections of James, I'm going to be looking at the topic of humility. And I kind of hinted that I was going to do that last time because, you know, you want wisdom. Of course we all do. It's one of the things I pray about mostly is, Lord, just give me wisdom. Help me know what to do. Help me be able to discern the situation and make the wise decision. But you can't have that unless you submit to God, because He is truly the only one and the only place you're going to get that kind of wisdom. It's not going to come from me. But in order to submit, you got to have humility. You got to be humble. It's kind of like, you know, there's one thing, and that's why James is systematically moving through this. You know, make sure your actions and everything you do portray truly who you are. The way you're acting right now, your mouth and things you're saying definitely are not showing a believer. These are things you have to actually be in control of. You want to be in control of them, then you better figure out what wisdom is, whether you've got trying to look for earthly or godly. And if you want godly wisdom, you got to recognize God is the center of that, and so you need to submit to Him. But in order to submit to Him, you got to recognize you're not anywhere in that equation. That takes great humility, huge humility, to submit to someone or something outside of self. And I'm going to tell you right now, there's nothing in you that wants to do that. There's nothing in human nature that wants to humbly lay aside self. Because, you know, everything that I do in my life, I look through a lens. I say this often as I'm teaching, a lens of Debbie. So I filter the entire world out there through me. I'm in here with me. This is the only me I know. I'm not in there with you. I'm not in there with my husband or any of my friends. I'm in here with me. So everything is filtered through me. The way I think about it, the way I perceive it, the way I feel about it. That I have to force myself to think of it from a different perspective, or to submit or humbly move myself aside. I have to think about it and then forcibly make myself do that. I will not naturally do that, and neither will you. You will always interpret life, you'll interpret situations, you'll interpret everything that happens to you that you are confronted with through a lens that is you. And unless you purposefully move to not do that, you will always automatically do that. It's why we have fights with everybody. It's why we fuss with people, because I don't understand why you're not seeing things from my perspective. Well, that's because you're looking through your own lens, and I'm looking through my lens. If we just recognize that I have to make myself get out from behind my lens and see it through other people's lenses, that takes humility. And the greatest amount of humility is submitting to the power and the sovereignty and having reverence for God. That takes, because you're no longer God of your life. You're submitting to Him being God, which takes humility. So James's next bit here as he goes on, and we're going to be looking at James chapter 4, verse 13, this time through verse 6 in chapter 5. He's going to talk about ways that we lack humility, things that we might not think about as displaying a humble attitude. And again, it's about being perceptive and recognizing this Bible as a mirror. We talked about that last time, and looking in it and being willing to see where we need help. Being willing to see if my mouth is a problem, if the way I treat other people is the problem, if I'm not humble, if I'm not submissive, if I'm not wise, if I'm fighting and fussing and arguing all the time, if I think I have to be right, if I have an issue with pride, I have to be able to see those things. And then, as he said in verses 17 and 18, I think in verses 7 and 8 of chapter 4, recognize that God He's there. He's going to give you the grace. You just need to look to stop looking to the devil. Verse 6, he gives more grace. Verse 5, he said he's jealously yearning for the fact that you look at the Spirit that's already within you. So we have to be able to look at these places where we need help, and James is about to pick some of those out for us. And again, it's going to be like, chapter 3 a little bit when he talked about taming the tongue. It might feel like he's picking on us. But truthfully, be introspective here. And recognize where it is that maybe you are not displaying a humble attitude, because as always, James will then move into this is how you are humble before the Lord, so that you can submit, so that you can have godly wisdom, so that you can then have a life that displays who it is that you say that you are. It's really a beautiful, simple equation, not easy, not complicated, but not easy. So the first, again, we're talking about the places where we lack humility. And as I said, none of us by nature are humble. The first thing I want to look at is verses 13 to 17 in chapter 4. We went down to verse 12 last time together. So I want to look at just this little short section here. My subtitle in my Bible calls it Boasting About Tomorrow. So James, again, is actually continuing his thoughts from verses 11 and 12. Remember, his thoughts in verses 11 and 12 is not to judge anybody else, not to look at what everybody else is doing and judging their behavior, judging their hearts. It is presumptuous behavior to assume that you can see into someone else's heart and then judge that heart. That's presumption. You are presuming to be God. So he's continuing in that presumptuous way that we think. Remember, no chapter and verse divisions. So he's saying you presume to be God by judging, and you also presume to be God by saying that you know what's going to happen, that you're boasting about what's going to happen tomorrow like you're God. Presumptuous behavior is never going to be a sign of humility. So look at verses 13 to 17 with me in chapter 4 of James. Again, I'm reading from the English Standard Version. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and then fails to do it, that for him is sin. So James he's saying here, again, as he's saying you're presuming to judge as if you were God. Now he's saying you're presuming to know what happens as if you're God. And so presumption, which is not humility, when I assume I am somebody that I'm not, I am not being humble. And right now, in those two situations from 11 and 12 and then 13 to 17, I'm not only just not being humble thinking I am all that, I'm actually presuming to be God in these two sections. This is big. This is a big condition of our humility, certainly not presuming to be God. And I know when I was growing up, and a lot of people think there's a trick here, that James is saying, don't act like you know what's going to happen. What you ought to say is, if the Lord wills, I'll do this. And so they think there's some kind of trick. You just have to add that little phrase. Well, if the Lord wills, if it's God's will, then you're fine. You're in the clear. From the South, they used to say, if the Lord's willing and the creek don't rise, then we know, then we'll do this and this, which is, that's, and so we think that we're in the clear. I put that phrase in there. I said, if it's God's will, then I can say whatever I want to. There's no trick here, because it's not about necessarily what you say. Remember, the words you say, what do they reflect? They reflect what's in your heart. So it's not about adding some little trick phrase on there. Well, if it's God's will, I'll do this and this. It's about, does your heart understand that God is the one who's in control here? Does your heart understand that it is about God's will, and are you willing to flex to God's will? Does it have to be yours, or are you willing to move in His? You're going to anyway. I hate to break it to you, but are you willing to not fuss and fight about that? Are you willing to understand He is God and you are not? Not presuming in that you have some control over that. And in verse 17, he's saying, and you know this, and if you might do some stuff wrong in that sin, but if you know the truth and you still do the bad stuff, that's really sin as well. The sins of omission are the same as the sins of commission. So you're basically still sinning if you know this truth and you still ignore it. So again, not presuming to be God. There's no humility in that. And then he goes on in chapter 5 to talk about how we don't necessarily display humility in our wealth. Now, before I get into this section, let me just, a lot of people are going to say, he's not talking to me. Especially as you look at the first verse, come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. So almost all of us, there might be some of y'all out there watching who are rich and wealthy in terms of worldly standards, and so you might immediately think this is talking to you. But for most of us, we're like, yep, that's not me. I can't even hardly pay my mortgage, so we know that that's not us, and so we just kind of turn that off. Well, I want to show you how that's not the case, but you also have to understand that no time in James, in the book of James, has he ever said, okay, I'm only talking to this group of people. This letter is to the church. So he's saying all of y'all need to be paying attention to this because all of y'all are messing this up. And again, understanding the Bible is a mirror. So when it says something, look at it. Look and see if there's anything in you that resembles this thing. So in verses 1 through 6 of chapter 5, he is talking about sometimes our lack of humility. It says in wealth, but it's not necessarily just when he says wealth, he's not necessarily talking about money or even things. He could be talking about your position. He could just be talking about your life, your attitude, who you are. There's often we don't display humility in that. So let me read that section first in its entirety, and then I want to go back and show you a few ways that maybe, I think I'm going to show you 4, where we don't necessarily always display humility in our wealth, even if we don't consider ourselves wealthy. So verses 1 through 6. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasures in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned, you have murdered the righteous person, and he does not resist you. So again, we might think because that first sentence is not about us, but it is. First off, let me just kind of, for the Americans who are watching, historically, the United States has been the wealthiest country ever. It certainly is the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, and which makes us the wealthiest Christians in the history of the world. So, you may not feel as an American Christian that you are rich, but I'm going to tell you right now, in the continent of Africa, there are 6 million people who will die of starvation this year. And a lot of those people are Christians. You are the wealthiest of the Christians in the world, and historically the most wealthy that has ever been. So we in terms of the standards by which we measure ourselves are Hollywood tabloids and all the people who have so much money, Trump and Oprah and all those people who have so much money they don't even know what to do with it. We measure ourselves in terms of that. But that's not the standard by which wealth is to be measured. So you can't go there. No matter what, you can't go there. But even beyond that, the wealth that James is talking about doesn't necessarily have to be wealth that is monetary or in things that you actually think you have or can spend or whatever. James' message, and understand his message is a message in terms of final judgment. He's saying, you guys are acting like this is the most important thing. You can't, what is it, that old saying, nobody goes to heaven with a U-Haul behind them, that you're not going to take that with you. It's going to corrode, it's going to rust, it's going to be destroyed, and you're trying to act like this is all that matters. And what James is saying, this is not all that matters, and you're not only are you acting like this is all that matters, trying to get the next buck, but you're also acting like your morals are dependent on this one. You're allowing your money and your things and who you are to dictate how you behave and how you treat people. There's a Richard Baxter, he's one of the old, really good dead guys. He had said, ask yourselves often how you shall wish at death and judgment your estates had been spent, and then use them accordingly now. That's really good. Think about it. If somebody told you you're going to die in 10 minutes or you're going to die in 1 day, I'll give you a day. Let's say they say in 24 hours you're going to be dead. As a Christian, what would you do with everything you have? If you knew in 24 hours you were going to face Jesus, how would you spend your money? Baxter's saying you need to just do that now, because you're not guaranteed the next 5 minutes, much less 24 hours. Why should not a man of reason do that which he knows beforehand he will vehemently wish that he had already done? That's some good words right there. Because we're so, and I'm as guilty as the next person. Sometimes I'm more guilty of that. I was just talking about having lost a whole bunch of sleep about finances right now. Acting like that's anything. If I knew that I was going to be dead tomorrow and live eternally, none of this matters. I'd be giving every bit of it to somebody, because it doesn't matter. I'm not taking it with me. And so what he goes on then to say is those of you, as we live our lives with that being the foundation, the center of everything we do, there's no humility in that, because you're not guaranteed the next 4 seconds, much less a long bunch of years to spend what it is that you've used to dictate how you behave. So what he then goes on after saying, you guys need to weep and howl over the judgment that's coming on you, because this is the center of your existence. And we know that as Americans, as Africans, as Singaporeans, as Asians, we know that everything about us is centered on how much money we have, or how much we're going to be able to take care of our families, or take care of ourselves, or what kind of car we drive. And we don't even care. It doesn't even matter if that car, or that family, or that house is spectacular. It's still the center of our existence. What am I going to eat? How am I going to feed my family? And we're not called to be irresponsible, but we are called to not have my heart beat according to that drum. That's the problem. And so he's saying, because we need to wail and mourn over the fact that that has become the center of our existence in verse 1, then he gives us a few ways that we can see this has become a problem. And so the first thing he says is that we have a tendency to hoard. Hoarding our stuff. In verses 2 and 3, look at those verses. He says, your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. So the first thing he says here warns us against thinking we can take this with us, that we're hoarding everything we have and not giving it away. And how much of what you have do you really need? How much of what you've got right now do you really need? How much of those things in your closet do you really wear? When was the last time you went through your closet and dug out a whole bunch of stuff and gave it to Salvation Army or Goodwill or someone needy? How much of that food in your pantry do you actually need? How much of that money in your bank account do you actually have to have? Why can't you give some of that away? Why are you hanging on to it? Just in case, just in case. And there is, again, I'm not preaching, and the Bible very clearly says that we're supposed to lay up and have money for our children, and that we should, invest and whatever. So we're not calling you to be stupid or to be irresponsible. But when you're doing that, it becomes the center of your existence. It's mine, it's mine, it's mine. I'm not letting go of it, because if I let go of it, I might not have it. That's hoarding. And James is saying, you guys, you're not taking it with you. There's by definition, hoarding means, or the definition of hoarding means a supply or accumulation that is hidden or carefully guarded. So, a lot of us don't hide our stuff, but we do guard it. So he's saying, do you guard your wealth? Do you guard your things? And James is like, it's not yours. At the end of the day, it's not yours anyway, so you can't be guarding it. The next thing he warns us against is our mistreatment of other people. He puts it as if they're people who are employed by you, but it doesn't have to be that. Verse 4 says, behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. And again, it may seem at first like this is not about you if you don't have a lot of people that work for you. But let me turn you to what he said in verse 17. Whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. So you may not mistreat, if you have people working for you, but how do you treat the person who comes and cleans your house? Or how do you treat the guys who are, working for the city and they're out trying to fix the roads? How do you treat your pastor? Have you thanked him lately for the work that he does? How have you thanked the people working childcare at your church? How do you treat them? Do you treat them as if they owe you this? This is their job. They owe you this because that's what they do for a living. How do you treat the bag boy at the grocery store? How do you treat the greeter at Walmart? Often we treat people who are in these positions who are serving us as if it's their obligation to serve us because that's their job. And that's what James is saying. You mistreat these people. The Lord, their cries and what you do to them reach God's ears. You are to treat every single person not as if they're less than you, not even as they're equal to you, but you're supposed to treat them as if they're better than you, no matter what they do. And James is saying that sometimes who we are, because I'm not the bagger, or I don't have to work at Walmart or whatever. I don't have to be a greeter at Walmart. Many people will use who they are to say, well, she works for me. Well, she cleans my house. I don't have to be nice to her. He's putting my groceries in my bag. That's what he's supposed to do. Somebody pays him to do that. The attitude of position is the same thing. And he's saying that, again, there's no humility in that. And just go out of your way to be nice to somebody. Go out of your way to tell your pastor thank you. Go out of your way to tell your small group leader you appreciate them. Go out of your way to tell people that you appreciate what they do. It's a good habit to get into. If you start now, then you can do that. The next one he talks about is self-indulgence in verse 5. He says, you have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. He's talking about a life of self-denial. And we love to do that. Here in America especially, we do not like to deny self. We are all about whether or not we have enough, and if this doesn't hurt me, then I won't worry about it. But if it does hurt me, I certainly am not going to do it. So he's just saying that this idea that we can't deny self is not humble, is it? There's nothing humble about putting me at the center of everything. And then finally, the last one is in hurting others in verse 6. And the language in verse 6 is really, really strong. And I don't have this one written down. He says, you have condemned, you have murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. It's strong because the things you do that hurts other people, hurting someone for not doing stuff, like we were just talking about a minute ago, is just as bad as hurting them by the things that you do. And I want to move from this just really quickly to tell you the three ways that we know our wealth, our position, the things we have, our attitudes toward money are going to lead into sin. The first one is the sin comes in how we get our wealth. Sometimes that's where the sin could be. It could be in our heart attitude, number 2. And number 3, it's how we use our wealth. So wealth in and of itself, as we know, is not the problem. It is our attitudes, it's our heart. And so that's why James has this whole section about your humility, understanding this is not about you. What you own is not about you. Who you are is not about you. I run a school in Africa. Getting people to donate to that school in Africa is nigh impossible sometimes. Because I hear, well, they're not Americans, and so we don't want to help our African brothers and sisters. These are Christians who would benefit from the school that I run in Africa, but it's more of I don't have enough to spare. And then I look at the lifestyles of the people who are not giving me. I mean, I have friends who have never donated a penny, not because they don't have it, because they do. But they don't donate because they don't want to let go of what they have. We do that all the time. And what did Jesus, I'm going to talk about this next time, but he was real clear about when you help someone who's sick, when you help someone who doesn't have any clothes, when you help the needy, you're helping him. He is that. And matter of fact, when he separates the sheep from the goats, that's one of the stipulations. He'll say, when I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I had no clothes, you gave me clothes. And the people are going to say, well, when did we ever do that? Well, when you gave it to the least of these, you did it to me. And so this is our attitudes about our wealth, our attitudes about who we are, our attitudes about what we have to take self out of that. And until we can do that, we're not going to be able to move in the rest of these heart issues that actually display who it is that we are and who it is that we say we follow. This, again, I know when you talk about money, half of y'all probably turn this off already. And I know that's hard. It's a difficult thing. But this is, your purse is real close to your heart. And that's just unfortunate about our natures. But at the end of the day, it's about humility. At the end of the day, it's will you be willing to deny yourself? And that's, what did Jesus say? His stipulation to the rich young ruler? Give it all away. It's not about a percentage. Just give it all away. And I'm not telling you to do that, but I'm telling you that's the standard. I'm telling you that's what Jesus said. So this is hard stuff, I know. We're going to talk a little bit more about this and the solution to this problem our next time together. God bless you. I pray that you will look at this book not as one that's on condemnation, but one that would help you and help me be able to live a life that's much more Christ-centered. God bless you. I'll talk to you next time. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Get Real with Deb Waterbury. I hope you were blessed, and I hope you got some information that's going to help you get through your day. If you want any more information on any of my books or my articles or on any of my future speaking engagements, you can find all that information at debwaterbury.com. God bless you.